Samantha had not bought something like this in years. On her way home from work, she had wandered into a small boutique downtown. The mannequins in the window were dressed in lace and silk. It's a kind of clothes she used to admire in her 20s but never had the courage to try. That afternoon, however, something inside her told her she needed a change. She wanted to feel alive again, to remind herself she was more than her daily routine of work, errands, and quiet evenings alone. Back at home, she carried the small bag upstairs to her bedroom. She closed the door behind her, placed the package on the bed, and hesitated for a moment. It felt strange, almost silly, but she smiled to herself as she carefully opened it. The fabric was softer than she expected, delicate against her skin. She slipped it on, adjusting the straps, smoothing the lace, and finally turned toward the mirror. The reflection surprised her. She had not seen herself this way in so long. She looked feminine, confident, even radiant. A quiet laugh escaped her lips, a mix of embarrassment and pride. She tilted her head, noticing the way her hair fell over her shoulders, the glow in her cheeks. For once, she wasn't thinking about bills, deadlines, or the quiet loneliness that had settled in her life. She was simply looking at herself and liking what she saw. The room was silent except for the faint hum of traffic outside the window. She thought she was alone. She thought she had the evening to herself, time to enjoy this private moment. That was when she heard the sound. A creak, the familiar noise of the front door opening. Her smile faded. She froze, trying to listen. Footsteps echoed faintly down the hallway, quick and familiar. Before she could react, a voice called out, "Sam, are you home?" It was Daniel. Her nephew. She turned sharply toward the door, her pulse racing. He had a key, of course. He always did. For years, Daniel had treated her home as a second place of comfort, especially during holidays or weekends when his parents were busy. He was only a few years younger, more like a younger brother than a nephew. She had practically raised him during some difficult times in his childhood, and that bond had never faded. But now, none of that mattered. What mattered was that he was inside the house, and she was standing in the middle of her room in something she had no intention of anyone ever seeing. Before she could grab her robe, the door pushed open. Daniel stepped inside without thinking, his eyes searching for her. The moment his gaze landed on her, he froze. The silence was unbearable. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest as she instinctively pulled the thin robe from the chair and clutched it around herself. Daniel's face flushed with shock, his mouth opening as though he wanted to say something. But no words came. Neither of them moved. The air between them felt heavy, filled with embarrassment and something else neither of them could name. Finally, Samantha broke the silence. Her voice trembled, soft but steady enough to carry. "Daniel, you should have knocked." He swallowed hard, his eyes quickly lowering to the floor. I'm sorry. I didn't know. He stopped, struggling with his words. "I didn't mean to barge in." She tightened the robe around her, her cheeks warm, her thoughts racing. She wanted to be angry, but she couldn't. He hadn't meant to see her like this. He hadn't planned any of it. It was an accident, nothing more. And yet, she looked at him, at the way his expression carried both surprise and an emotion she couldn't quite place. She felt something. Inside her stir, she shook her head lightly, trying to clear the thought. This was Daniel, the boy she had watched grow up. The young man she had encouraged through college applications, heartbreaks, and new beginnings. And yet, standing there in that charged silence, the years of familiarity suddenly felt fragile. Daniel shifted, clearly uncomfortable, his hand gripping the doorknob as though he wanted to disappear. I'll give you space," he muttered, backing toward the hallway. His voice was soft, but the weight in it made her chest tighten. "Daniel," she said quickly, her tone gentler than she expected. He paused, his back still turned, waiting. She didn't know what to say next. She wanted to ease the tension, to make it seem less than it was, but the words wouldn't form. All she managed was a quiet, "It's okay," he nodded almost imperceptibly. Before stepping out and closing the door behind him, Samantha stood there for several minutes, still holding the robe tightly around her. The mirror reflected not just her appearance, but the whirlwind of feelings on her face: confusion, embarrassment, and something deeper that unsettled her. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling slightly. That simple accident had changed something. She didn't know what, but she felt it in her chest, in the silence that lingered after he left. She told herself it was nothing, just an awkward moment they would both forget. And yet deep down, she knew they wouldn't. Because in the way he had looked at her, even for that split second, she had seen something that made her heart beat differently. Samantha barely slept that night. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her thoughts racing. Every time she closed her eyes, the moment replayed, the sound of the door opening. Daniel's startled face, the sudden weight in the air. She told herself it was nothing, an accident that would soon be forgotten. But her heart refused to calm down. Down the hall, Daniel wasn't sleeping either. He tossed and turned in the guest room, unable to push the image from his mind. He had grown up seeing Samantha as family, someone steady, someone who was always there when life felt unstable. But tonight, for the first time, he saw her differently. He didn't mean to, and he didn't want to cross any lines. Yet he couldn't deny what had stirred inside him. Morning came too quickly. Samantha got up early, slipping into her routine. She brewed coffee, set 2 mugs on the table, and tried to shake off the tension. She told herself everything would be fine once they acted normal again. Daniel would come downstairs, they would talk casually, and the night before would fade into the background. But when he entered the kitchen, the silence felt heavier than ever. He greeted her quietly, his voice softer than usual, and sat at the table. She poured coffee into his cup without looking directly at him. The clink of the spoon against the ceramic sounded too loud, filling the quiet room. For a few minutes, neither spoke. Samantha stared at the steam rising from her cup, wishing the silence would break itself. Daniel fidgeted with his mug, stealing glances at her but quickly looking away when her eyes nearly met his. Finally, Daniel took a breath and spoke. His voice was hesitant but honest. "Aunt Sam, yesterday, I didn't mean to walk in on you like that. I wasn't thinking. I'm sorry." She looked up at him, her heart softening. His face carried genuine regret, but also something else, something unspoken. She gave a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's fine, Daniel. Really. Let's just forget it happened." He nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. He held her gaze for a second longer, and in that moment she saw something she had never seen in him before. Admiration, maybe even awe. It unsettled her, not because it was wrong, but because a part of her wanted to acknowledge it. Samantha stood up quickly, taking her cup to the sink. She needed to move, to distract herself. But Daniel's voice came again, quiet but firm. "You looked happy yesterday." She froze, her back to him. "Happy?" she asked, her tone cautious. "Yeah," he continued. "Like yourself again. Confident. I haven't seen you like that in a while." The words sank into her chest, both warming and breaking her at the same time. She hadn't realized how invisible she had felt in recent years. Much of herself she had lost in routines and responsibilities. To hear Daniel say that, to know he had noticed, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't expected. She turned slightly, catching his expression. He wasn't mocking her, wasn't teasing. His voice had been gentle, almost reverent. She didn't know how to respond, so she gave a small nod and whispered, "Thank you." The rest of the morning passed with awkward attempts at normalcy. They talked about ordinary things, groceries, the weather, his job search, but the words felt like a thin cover over something deeper. Every time their eyes met, both quickly looked away, afraid of what might be revealed if they lingered too long as the day went on. Samantha tried to focus on her work from home, while Daniel busied himself with chores around the house. But no matter what they did, the tension lingered. It wasn't the heavy, uncomfortable kind anymore. It was different, charged, alive, like an invisible thread pulling them closer while they both tried to resist. That evening, Samantha stood by the living room window, watching the last light of the sun fade over the neighborhood. She wrapped her sweater around herself and sighed. She didn't know how to handle what was happening. She loved Daniel dearly, but in a way that had always been safe, familiar, family. Now, after one unexpected moment, everything had changed. Daniel joined her in the room, sitting on the couch with a book in his hands. But he wasn't reading. He glanced at her reflection in the glass, and she felt his eyes even without looking back. "You've always been strong," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Stronger than anyone I know." She turned, surprised by his words. His gaze was steady now, not flustered like before, but filled with a depth that made her chest tighten. She wanted to say something, to remind him of the boundaries they couldn't cross. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she simply sat down on the other end of the couch. The days after that morning stretched longer than usual. Samantha tried to carry on as though nothing had changed, but everything had. She noticed the way Daniel lingered in the kitchen when she was there. The way his conversations felt slower, more careful, as if every word mattered. He was still the same Daniel she had known since he was a boy. But something unspoken now flowed between them, and she couldn't escape it. One afternoon, she decided to go for a walk through the park near her house. The air carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the trees were painted in shades of gold and crimson. She wrapped a scarf around her neck, hoping the crisp autumn breeze would clear her thoughts. To her surprise, Daniel joined her without asking. He walked beside her, hands in his pockets, his steps matching hers naturally. They talked about small things at first, the beauty of the season, the plans he had for his career, the way time seemed to move faster now than ever before. But even in these light conversations, there was an undertone neither of them could ignore. Each laugh lingered, each silence grew heavier, each glance held too long. When they reached a bench under a large oak tree, Samantha sat down, brushing a few dry leaves away. Daniel lowered himself beside her. For a while they just watched families pass by, children playing, couples holding hands. The scene was ordinary, but the silence between them was not. Daniel finally broke it. "I know things have been different lately," he said softly, his eyes fixed on the ground. Samantha turned toward him, her heart beating faster. "Different?" she asked, though she knew exactly what he meant. He nodded. "I don't know how to explain it. I feel closer to you. Closer than I should, maybe. And I can't stop thinking about it." Her breath caught. She wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but the truth was sitting in her chest, like a weight she couldn't lift. She looked away, watching the wind scatter the leaves across the path. "Daniel, we can't talk like this. We're family, I know," he said quickly. "I've told myself that 100 times, but it doesn't change how I feel. You've been there for me more than anyone else in my life, and now I see you differently. Not just as family. As you." His words shook her. They were honest, almost painfully so, and they struck a chord she had been trying to silence. She wrapped her scarf tighter around her shoulders, as if it could shield her from the emotions rising inside. "You can't say that," she whispered. "Then tell me you don't feel it too," he replied. His voice low but firm. She couldn't answer. She wanted to insist that she didn't, that she only cared for him in the way she always had. But the truth was more complicated. His presence had begun to fill spaces in her heart she thought were empty forever. The way he noticed her, the way he made her laugh again, the way his eyes softened when they met hers. It all made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken truth. Samantha finally stood, brushing the leaves from her lap. "We should go back," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel rose beside her, his expression torn between frustration and understanding. He didn't push further. Instead, he walked with her back to the house, each step heavy with things left unsaid. That evening, the tension lingered. Samantha made dinner, moving quietly around the kitchen. Daniel helped set the table, his movements careful, his eyes watching her when he thought she wouldn't notice. When they finally sat down to eat, the clink of silverware was the only sound for a while. Halfway through the meal, Daniel set his fork down and leaned back in his chair. "You don't have to pretend with me, you know," he said softly. She looked up, startled. "Pretend? That none of this is happening? That you don't feel it? I see it in your eyes," Samantha swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, but her silence gave her away. She pressed her hands together, staring at her plate. "Even if I do," she whispered, "it doesn't mean it's right." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He respected her words, even if they tore at him. Later that night, Samantha stepped onto the porch with a blanket draped around her shoulders. The autumn air was cool, the stars faint above the quiet neighborhood. She thought she was alone until Daniel joined her, sitting at the other end of the porch swing. For a long time, they said nothing. The creak of the swing and the rustle of the trees filled the silence. Finally, Samantha spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "You mean too much to me to risk losing you. That's why I can't. Let this go where it wants to." Daniel turned toward her, his eyes steady, filled with a kind of pain she couldn't ignore. "And you mean too much to me not to say it," he replied. "Even if nothing ever happens. Even if I have to live with it quietly." Her throat tightened, her eyes stinging. The honesty in his words cut through every wall she had built. She wanted to reach for his hand, to offer him comfort, but she stopped herself. Instead, she looked out at the quiet street, tears brimming but refusing to fall. The night felt endless, heavy with emotions neither of them could escape. They sat together until the cold grew sharper, until the silence said more than words ever could. And as Samantha finally rose to go inside, she realized something she couldn't deny anymore. The line between them had blurred. It wasn't broken yet, but it was thinner than ever, and it terrified her. That's part 3 expanded to approximately 1,000 words. Written, fast-paced, simple, emotional, and fully within YouTube monetization guidelines. Weeks passed, and the weight of silence grew heavier between Samantha and Daniel. The closeness they once shared now felt complicated, and every small moment carried meaning. They avoided speaking of what had been said on the porch. Yet the memory of it lingered in everything, in their glances, in their pauses, in the way their conversations trailed off too soon. Daniel had been offered a new job in another city. It was the kind of opportunity he had been waiting for, a chance to start fresh and build a future. Samantha knew he had to take it, but the thought of him leaving filled her with a sadness she couldn't put into words. She kept herself busy around the house, telling herself this was the best path for both of them. Distance would help. Time would help. The night before his departure, Samantha stood in front of her mirror again. She wasn't wearing the lingerie from before. Just a simple dress she had always liked. Soft fabric, comfortable fit, a reflection of her truest self. She looked at her reflection, trying to gather the courage to face what was coming. She whispered to herself, "It's better this way," though the words didn't ease the ache in her chest. The next morning, Daniel came downstairs with his bags packed. He looked tired, as if he hadn't slept. Samantha greeted him with a smile that didn't quite hide the pain in her eyes. They moved through the kitchen quietly, making coffee, sharing toast, but avoiding the one subject that mattered most. When it was time to leave, Daniel set his bags by the door and turned to her. His eyes lingered on her face as though he wanted to memorize every detail. "You've always been the one I could count on," he said softly. "Through everything. I don't know how I'm going to walk out that door and not look back." Samantha felt her throat tighten. She wanted to tell him everything she had held back the nights she had stayed awake thinking of him, the way his presence had made her feel alive again. But the words refused to come. She stepped closer, placing her hand on his arm. "You'll be fine, Daniel. You're stronger than you think. This is your time to build something new." He shook his head slightly, his jaw tense. "That's not what I mean. What I mean is, you mean more to me than I can ever say. Leaving you behind feels like leaving a part of myself." Her heart cracked at his confession. She wanted to answer with the truth, to let him know she felt the same pull. But another part of her whispered that some loves were too complicated to hold on to. She drew in a shaky breath, searching for the right words. "You'll always carry me with you," she said softly. "Even if I'm not there. That's how love works." His eyes glistened, and for a moment it seemed as if he might say more, but he stopped. Instead, he reached for her hand, holding it tightly. Neither wanted to let go, but they both knew they had to. The taxi horn sounded outside, breaking the moment. Daniel lifted his bag, his movements slow, reluctant. He opened the door and stepped outside, turning back one last time. Samantha stood in the doorway, her eyes shimmering, her smile fragile but filled with love. She whispered, "Take care of yourself. And remember, you'll always have a place in my heart." Daniel nodded, unable to speak. Then he turned and walked toward the waiting car. Samantha watched him go, her chest heavy with unspoken words. As the car disappeared down the street, the silence of the house wrapped around her again. It felt empty but different now, as if the walls themselves carried the memory of what had been shared. She walked slowly back inside, her steps echoing through the quiet. She paused in front of the mirror one more time, seeing not just her reflection, but the woman she had become through all of this. A woman who had been reminded that she could still feel, still love, still long for something more than routine. Tears slid down her cheeks, but they were not only from sadness. They carried relief too, relief that she had allowed herself to feel deeply again, even if she couldn't keep it. She knew some stories weren't meant to last forever. Some were meant to awaken the heart, to remind it of its strength, then to let it go. In the weeks that followed, Samantha carried on wit.